how do you guys first define sustainability in the first place? And then the follow-on is then that how do you define a sustainable brand? So first we need the core of what sustainability is, and then what defines a sustainable brand.
I will start. So I will anchor you in what perspective I am bringing. So I actually joined Manulife as their first global chief sustainability officer. And it was 3 years later that I took on the marketing portfolio for our wealth and asset management business. So as a sustainability first, sort of marketing second person, when we think about sustainability, we're really talking about the impact that the organization has on the world, both positive and negative, environmental, social, all aspects of the impact that an organization has.
I love that line, Sarah. Sustainability first, marketing second, right? We have a lot of marketeers here who may disagree, but I think, Randall, to your question, there are two fundamental definitions of sustainability. Was the broader one, which Sarah was saying, in which you talk about the sustainability of brands being, how durable they are, and by being durable, how they can stay relevant over time, by being, relevant to their clients, relevant to the community, and doing those things. And the other, the more narrow definition, which is also equally important, is talking about it from the point of view of climate action and climate change, and what's the role brands have to play in that front. Yesterday, the big theme for Davos this year is rebuilding trust. Yesterday was the launch of the Trust Barometer, which Edelman does. Every year it shows consistently that amongst the institutions, the highest trust which people have in institutions remains with business. Okay, much higher than with NGOs, than with governments, and media is right at the end of the line. Sorry, Randall.
Okay, but we're also a business, so we'll take it.
So brands have a responsibility to leverage that trust to do good for society. And one of the areas where they are making an impact and they need to make even more of an impact is the climate front.
David, maybe talk a little bit about what brand finance does.
Is this working?
It is on.
I am a chartered accountant. That's my first role. But I worked in marketing for many years, and I now run Brand Finance, which is the world's leading brand valuation firm. And we have the biggest database of both brand values and brand equity tracking for a whole variety of different brands, and that would include corporate and nation brands. And in answer to the question about sustainability, it seems to me that what sustainability is about is marshalling resources in such a way that the earth is a sustainable thing, and that cascades down to an individual country and business level, that it is running its resources in a sustainable way, which frankly means running it in an economically efficient way, which I am not sure is always top priority.
Right. And so you're crunching the numbers. So is sustainability profitability?
The simple answer is yes. And if it is not profitable, it won't have a future. I could just give you one simple example.
If you could put real numbers to it, because we hear that a lot, but you're actually crunching the numbers. So.
Yeah, well, I was just talking to a guy who used to run sustainability for Mars the other day. He was their global sustainability director. And he said it makes him very angry when he hears people talking about the fact that you shouldn't bother to invest in sustainability because your shareholders won't wear it and they can't stand it. And that is a common frame in the UK stock market. There are a variety of quite annoying investors who say that people like Unilever should not do a lot of this sustainability stuff because it's wasting shareholders' money. Yep. Now, what he said was a lot of the sustainability initiatives, and certainly all the ones he did, either reduced costs or increased demand or reliability or something, but there was an economic benefit from doing it. And he said without that, Mars would probably not have been doing them.
You advise hundreds of companies, so you see this firsthand, right?
I mean, to your question, I think, in short, sustainability may not be that profitable in the short term, but it's definitely profitable in the long term, right? It's not easy for businesses, and depends which industry, which sector, which part of the world you're in. For many industries, it's not easy to abate carbon, right? If you're in steel, if you're in transport, it's much harder. The thing is, there's a role here also for consumers. And a lot of talk is given on the fact that consumers are going to force businesses to be sustainable. But there's a caveat to that. Yes, consumers want businesses to be sustainable, but do consumers want to pay for it? a lot of the research says that an average consumer is willing to pay 10 to 12% extra for a product which is sustainable and not more than that, right? There was this fantastic example.
That's the sweet spot.
Yeah, I'll share this example. I was speaking with the CEO in the airline industry, and they had put out this little add-on for sustainability in which if you bought your airplane ticket for $800, you could say, let me make my journey carbon neutral by adding $15 more. Do you know what was the uptake of that program? Less than 1% of people took it, right? On the other hand, if two airlines are operating and one is more sustainable than the other, customers are more likely to choose it. But there is a price point, both for consumers and for businesses in embracing this. In the long term, it has to be profitable because if you're not sustainable in the long term, you will not exist.
So Manulife obviously is a global life and health insurance company. It is our business for people to be healthier. The healthier and the more that we can invest in people being healthier, the better it is for our business, less premiums, it's cheaper for us. So there is a fundamental shared value or business alignment to the betterment of health for societies and our business. I'll give you one other example as we think about sort of core environmental sustainability. On our investment side, so the assets that we manage as a result of the insurance liabilities, about $450 billion. We've been investing in renewable energy for a long time. Not because we had a target to do so, not because, some regulation was telling us, but because it was just a great investment. And, we on the investment management side are creating those products, those sustainability products for people. It's great investment. You're going to get your financial returns, and you're going to be able to have, either the carbon credits or others through asset classes like timberland and agriculture that are going to maximize returns for you.
I think when we talk about sustainability and brand and differentiation, I think businesses embrace sustainability for different reasons. Some might do it for differentiation, some might do it due to regulatory pressure, some do it due to pressure from their communities, whether it's their employees, their customers. We fundamentally believe that, at least on our side, we embrace sustainability because we feel it's just the right thing to do. Whether it differentiates our brand or not is, it's a side bonus. As a company, we've taken, multiple steps towards this. We've taken a net zero pledge. We intend to be net zero by 2030. The good news is we are 2 years ahead of schedule. We're working with a lot of our customers using the power of technology to see how they can become more efficient and all of that. But also as a CMO, I'm also kind of looking at our whole marketing footprint and seeing how can we do things more sustainably. So just one quick example on that is we're a big sponsor of marathon properties worldwide. So we work with the Council of Responsible Sports in the US to build this app, which we made available free to all sports organizations to help them monitor and do better on the carbon footprint. And we've encouraging all our partners in the marathon associations to embrace this. 2 of them have done really well last year. So the TCS London Marathon and the TCS Toronto, where you're from, Waterfront Marathon have got gold and evergreen status on it. And I think that's the role which you need to play as a CMO is in your smaller remit and your footprint, what can you do and what's the change you can make?
It makes sense. How, as brand managers, how do you get your enterprise behind this? Because in some ways, you guys are leading this in many ways in terms of getting the whole enterprise to move.
It's the latest wave of technology. And I think if you look at technology as a whole, it's had dramatic effects on improving the way companies work, the speed, the efficiency, the number of people. And I'm pretty sure from what I've heard that AI will do the same thing. Now, obviously, if you do that, you make companies more efficient. And you're likely to be helping with things like the environment, the environmental impact of businesses. There's a lot of scare stories about AI, but they're probably exaggerated.
But it's less about AI, I guess I'm asking, than this making sustainability part of your mission throughout the enterprise. And again, to me, that's a uniquely CMO role.
Yeah, I mean, I think it ultimately, for many years we've been talking about this concept of purpose and how do you embed purpose in your brand? How do you embed purpose? I mean, fundamentally, again, depending on the industry with which you work in, that is either a more natural connection to your products and services, or it's more tangential and it's more, fundamentally what you believe in versus connected to your products and services. I think there's going to be two themes moving forward as we all navigate what is, set to be a pretty fragile world for the next few months. Authenticity is going to be a critical part of this element, right? How do you make sure that what you're saying from a sustainability perspective integrated with the brand is authentic? And secondly, transparency. Consumers, employees want the transparency. They really want to understand what's behind some of what's being said at the brand level from a sustainability perspective.
Randall, I think the answer, frankly, is no different to anything. If you're talking about how do you take the organization along with you on the sustainability vision and journey, it's no different from how do you take the organization along with you on your values or on a business strategy or anything else. It's the same formula. It's living and walking what you're talking about as a leadership team. It's not just the CMO, it's the whole C-suite. It's communicating constantly. It's taking concrete actions. The one advantage, I think, on the sustainability front is that unlike other things where you might be educating and encouraging your organization to do things differently, here you'd find a lot of your employees already very educated about the challenge here. Many are very passionate about it. And, even in talking with our HR team, sometimes, they say in the interviews which we have of people we're encouraging to join our company, one of the first one or two questions is, what are you doing on sustainability? And that wasn't the case a few years ago.
Right. So let's push that a little bit because, similarly to we talk about the narrowing gap in terms of quality, talent becomes that much more valuable. How you use that sustainability message as a sword instead of a shield to get better talent. There's got to be a secret there.
Yeah, for us, it's people want to, know that the organization is doing a good thing, right? It's like everyone wants a gym in the office. No one wants to go to the gym, but they want the gym in the office. They want to be able to say there's a gym. There's another group of people that deeply want to get engaged, and you've got to figure out a way to meaningfully engage them. We're seeing certainly a decentralization of sustainability. Sustainability is not the responsibility anymore of a sustainability function. It's being embedded in marketing and risk and finance, and so giving people those opportunities to embed elements of environmental or social impact through their job is the most meaningful way to do that.
David, are there any, as you, compile all the data on this, are there numbers in terms of employee satisfaction and things like that would, again, help drive talent?
So when we came here 5 years ago with TCS, we actually launched one study which was to evaluate the performance of CEOs as brand guardians and reputation guardians. And in that sample, which is done with equity analysts and informed publics, there are a variety of things that people care about, particularly the CEO having vision. But one of the things which has grown year by year by year is their reliance and backing for sustainability in all three of its key areas. And we just announced the results today, actually, of our latest study. And it demonstrates very clearly that the most successful CEOs are the ones that do adopt sustainability practices. And one of the key audiences for that is the internal one. Obviously external as well, but internal. And just coming back to the point you made earlier on, you were saying CMOs are probably the best cheerleaders for sustainability. I want to be the contrarian on that one. Brand finance was set up with the strapline, we bridge the gap between marketing and finance. I think almost it's been a bit of a problem that the main cheerleader for sustainability has been marketing and comms, and the rest are not listening. And so therefore you have got to persuade the finance directors this is important, and in particular the CEOs, because nothing really happens until those two people decide. And one of the nice things, or one of the good things, is that over the last few years, I think the message really is getting across to the CEOs and the CFOs that it matters. Finally. So I think it will now happen.
Well, we're also going to see more, we're seeing more ESG regulation, 100%. Which of course that makes people, pay attention. What are the implications for brand managers as we see more regulation, more regulators focusing on ESG?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I'm watching and I'm conscious of is as it becomes more of a regulatory requirement that we lose the emotional, brand play, that sustainability will go live in finance and risk. And I actually, the pendulum, as it does, swings. And it was probably too far on the marketing, side. And that's where you got, particularly in the financial services industry, issues of greenwashing. And I think we're going to see it swing. And we just got to keep it somewhere in the middle where we are, embedding it in our brand story. And we are able to tell, the story of what sustainability is without, sterilizing it into the regulatory environment.
Yeah, I mean, Randall, the regulatory pressure is there, and it's going to only ratchet up. And I think if you break it down, there are two aspects where the regulatory pressure really starts to hit companies. First is in raising standards, and the second largely is in reporting, right? On the standard side, I think the smart strategy for any business should be that if you're smart, you're ahead of the standards. You've already implemented the change before you're required to do so. The reporting side is a different thing, and it can become very cumbersome. Large companies have the resources, they can create an entire new compliance department and work on it. I think for smaller companies, it becomes a huge burden. For example, in the European Union, there is this CBAM regulation which is coming on, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is going to require you to report on all the sourcing in your supply chain and where it's from and basis on which your tax is going to be decided. It's going to put a huge burden on smaller businesses. But there's no choice. If you got to operate in a market and you choose to, then you need to abide by the regulations which are there. I think I'm totally with Sarah on that. I think one of the challenges for businesses is when there's pressure on a business, there's pressure to try and show you're doing something. I think, as always, the right thing to do is to actually do it. Even if you're slower in doing it, be transparent about it, saying we're bringing the change. It takes us a longer time. We're getting there. But if you feel the pressure and try to spin a story which is not true, you're going to get into trouble pretty quickly. And then it's your corporate comms department, which is on crisis mode throughout.
Right.
Yeah.
Good, Dave.
I read a very, very interesting article this morning that was stimulated by some analysis done by a company called CB Analytics. They review companies before they do IPOs. And Shine, the Chinese fashion company, apparently is worth 65 billion and wants to do an IPO in the States. Probably be the second or third biggest IPO of the year. But their practices are not deemed to be as sustainable as they should be. And so there's another company called Know Your Channel, and they rank companies in that sector, in the fast fashion sector, by how good they are in sustainability. Lululemon comes up first. Boohoo came quite low. And when that happened, Boohoo, its shares were sold down. And it's mainly because the analysts believe that if you are not following these sustainability practices, particularly in terms of sourcing, you will lose market share. So therefore, the financial guys are following the market. And that's why it is a major problem for brand managers. You've got to get it sorted out, or you screw up your market share and you screw up your financials.
But it's counterintuitive in some ways, because to gain market share, that probably means that sometimes you have to walk away from opportunities if they don't fit sustainability. But, it's very hard to get people in other areas of the company to say, no, we're going to leave that business, or we're going to leave that client, or we're going to leave that initiative. How do you do that? How do you coach people in your organization that the long term means transparency? But you mentioned doing the right thing,
Yeah.
but sometimes that means you're going to have to take a short-term hit. How do you get people to do that? Good. Abhinav, go ahead.
I got an answer.
All right. I think that's I don't know if there's an answer to it. I think that's the biggest challenge for CEOs today, is how do you balance the short-term pressure with the long-term interests of the company? And, different CEOs do it differently. Some bow entirely to short-term pressure, move up the stock price, all of that, and then leave the company in a state where in the longer term somebody has to come in and fix it. And the others who think of the 100-year vision and focus on it, but don't take enough short-term actions to give them the space to drive their long-term vision. I think, as always in anything in life, the balance of being able to do some things in a smart way, but also keeping the long-term, the picture in mind, are the people who end up winning in this game.
The simple answer, in my opinion, is regulation. And the international financial reporting standards and the EU and a number of other places, including the US, are now becoming very active in legislating for basic standards on all the aspects of sustainability. And frankly, this is one of the big issues. Yesterday I had a discussion with Martin Sorrell. He is very much in favor of self-regulation in all these areas. He just doesn't believe in regulation. But it seems to be the only way, as far as I'm concerned, to actually make people get up to the basic minimum.
Yep. Well, let's push that a little bit, because we talk about regulation, we talk about government. ESG in some ways, especially in the US, I'll give it a kind of a US-Canada point of view here, is that there's been some politicization of ESG, specifically the term especially. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, so it's very clear for us, again, as an investment shop, when ESG factors are financially material, they are taken into consideration, period, end, stop. Just like you would take any other, financial or non-financial metric. Once you get to that level of understanding, the politicization sort of goes away, unless it's an impact first, product or experience. So again, how do you define, when we're looking at an investment in real estate in Florida, you're absolutely going to take into consideration flooding, and the natural sort of effects of climate change. That's not because, there's a climate action plan. That's because that's just good business. So it's how do you figure out what is financially material from all of these aspects and implementing it, where relevant.
Most things that have major economic consequences are political. There is no way of getting away from it. The question is, what is the right thing to do in a political situation? And I think elections will be influenced by the attitude that they take. I mean, for example, that one example I gave a moment ago about sourcing clothes. Places like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, China, the working practices and the costs and the amounts that are paid to staff, or, for example, with a lot of commodities in Africa where coffee and things like that are not paid for properly, if you don't have either, semi-regulation like the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board or actual legislation like the EU is bringing in, you will not make progress.
Yeah, but if I might offer a slightly counter view, I think if you count on regulation to be your best friend in affecting change, I feel in many ways you've almost failed as a business, right? Because it's an external factor which is forcing you to do a change which you should have foreseen, right? I'll give you an example in our sector, in technology, right? Today, the whole technology sector accounts for about 3% of carbon emissions worldwide. It's about in range similar to the aviation sector, although the aviation sector gets a lot more grief than the technology sector does. But if you look at the trend in the future, this is going to be a huge challenge for the tech industry because the sheer amount of data which we are creating and storing and which we are transacting with is growing. Just in every year, we create more data in that year than in the history of the human civilization,
data.
Right? And AI, Web3, crypto, all heavy data, IoT. So at least some of the surveys point to the fact that the technology sector is going to take up its 3% emission rate to something as high as 14% in the coming 14 or 15 years.
Yeah.
We got to see this coming and change, invest in green data centers, do whatever is required before there is somebody sitting in the European Commission or somebody sitting in Washington who says, hey, you're the next target on the block.
It's ironic, right?
Well, I think one of the things, I do agree with you, great brands should be leaders. And take someone like Patagonia, they've been leaders in sustainability. Take someone, frankly, like Tata. Tata was set up as a company that was inherently sustainable and has been for over 100 years. I mean, it is definitely a leader. And I think you can differentiate yourself. But one of the difficulties is, if everybody else doesn't follow, what do you do? And it can create a huge disadvantage. Now, in the case of the Tata Group, they don't care. They have always done sustainable things and right things. Not everyone knows all about them, but they are extremely good in their practices. That's 100 years ago. Not everyone's caught up with you yet. So this is why I believe intervention is much more significant for the vast majority to get over human nature. And let me give you an example. When you go into these cheap shops and buy stuff that are probably produced in the wrong way, if you ask consumers, so what do you think then? Do you object to the fact that they're produced under the wrong circumstances, they'll go, well, not really, because it's only $3 or it's $5, and I couldn't afford it if it was 10. So they kind of like suspend their disbelief. So you have to have intervention as well as leaders.
Okay, fair point. Good debate.
Looking at the next 5 years as we go on this path, what do you think is the biggest hurdle? What's the hardest challenge we have in this intermediate step?
So I think we've come on the sustainability front, we have moved from a discussion of should we set targets, then that evolved into how do we set targets. Everyone set targets. Everyone knows what we need to do. The challenge is execution. It is actually making progress in areas where we know what we need to do. We generally know how we're going to do it. It's, and again, it's the technology and that's going to scale the opportunity, but it's all about execution now.
Yeah. You know what? I think on the plus side, the technology is evolving rapidly, whether the energy transition and other things. Businesses are doing their work. I think 80% of large businesses have taken their net zero pledges, etc. If you ask me, the biggest challenge, single biggest challenge to the energy transition, to climate action, is misinformation. Yeah. All right? If you look around the world, led by political discourse, led by weaponization of social platforms, there's a polarization of views forming on climate change. Nowhere more so than where you're from. And I think that leads to, when there's polarization, that leads to political consequences, which leads to policy consequences, and so forth. And I think, if you ask me, that's the single biggest risk. If we are not together, at least in acknowledging that there's a challenge which we all need to work on together, there's always going to be issues.
That.
Well, obviously I mentioned about economics, and making it economically viable is one of the main challenges, both for individuals and companies. But I actually think the most important, most difficult challenge is a brand one, and it's actually making the general public in the world understand what sustainability is. When you say to people about sustainability, they really don't know what you are talking about. And when you ask the question, would you like to define sustainability? I thought for a moment, it's one of those words that people just go, oh yeah, sustainability. But in fact, it's very complex. And, I really have to say, I don't think the SDG goal from the UN is a masterclass in branding. It is deeply confusing, deeply confusing. If they want to get the message across, they have got to get brilliant marketers like Abhinav to actually do something, to communicate it so it's meaningful to people. I just don't think it is.
You work for a company that advises hundreds of the best companies in the world. What, for all three of you, is the one piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's looking to you as leaders in this, on this journey, the one best piece of advice? Just David will go and will come right to me.
Persuade the CEO that he is not going to lose his job because investors don't like it.
Or maybe tell him he might lose his job if he doesn't. All right? The carrot and the stick. All right, Abhinav, you do this all the time.
I'm going to go the opposite to him, which is, instead of the CEO, listen to young people. When I want to get the truth, I ask my children, and they say it straight up. It's like, they say, Dad, you're the one causing the climate crisis because you didn't change from a fossil fuel car to an electric car, which we did because they pushed it.
Yes. And I have teenagers, and that is correct. But it's not just morally, it's that if you look at the demographic bubble, those are your future consumers. So it's, yes, they're coming in from a different point of view, but that's going to be the mainstream point of view. 5 years, 10 years, it's coming. So that's great advice. Sarah, you get last word. Last word on a great panel. Thank you, everybody, for a great panel.
I would say don't let perfect be the enemy of good. In a world where, the regulatory environment and the data challenges, we got to make progress and just go for it.
That's great advice from three great thinkers. Thank you for your time. Thank you for a very interesting panel. And thank you for, being part of a really cool day here in Davos. So appreciate you. Appreciate everything.
Thank you, Randall, for the conversation.